In an ongoing, desperate effort to distract from Donald Trump's political and legal woes, Republicans in the House of Representatives are continuing the Biden family witch hunt, trying to impugn President Biden by way of impugning his civilian son, Hunter Biden. And it's gotten so bad that Republicans are being even more open with their agenda, with one Republican saying that it doesn't even matter if there is no proof against President Biden. That's how far we've sunk. But before we dive into that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. So what am I talking about? Well, James Comer, the Republican leader of the House Oversight Committee, the Grand Inquisitor, so to speak, of the Hunter Biden Inquisition. Again, as a reminder, Hunter Biden being the civilian son of Donald Trump, a person who has never wielded state or government power on behalf of his father or on behalf of his father's former boss, Barack Obama, President Obama, a man who has never served in the White House, a civilian son of a current president who's been investigated at least 4 times and who is currently facing legal consequences for his own crimes. Well, James Comer is desperate to investigate Hunter Biden until he can find something by which to tar and feather President Biden himself. Well, now we're in a situation where, again, time after time, they will make a move and no evidence comes up impugning Joe Biden or suggesting that Joe Biden is corrupt or committed any sort of crime. So now the Republicans are moving the goalpost. And this is what Republican Byron Donalds has to say when it comes to the burden of trying to prove that Joe Biden is corrupt. This is what he has to say about that burden now.
The White House says Joe Biden never got a dime. I don't believe it. And at the end of the day, if Hunter Biden was spending money for his dad on behalf of his dad doesn't have to take a dime. That's facilitating a bribe from the president of the United States through his son.
So they don't even have evidence of that. All right, let's be very clear. They have no evidence that Hunter Biden is spending money on behalf of his father. I have no idea what that means. But know what he says. He's like, listen, so the White House is correctly pointing out that you have to prove that Joe Biden received illicit bribes to even come close to making a case. And he says Byron Donalds doesn't say that he has proof. He just says, I don't believe it. I don't believe that that's the case. I don't believe that Joe Biden didn't receive illicit bribes. He offers no proof. This is just faith. Apparently, this is a matter of religion for Byron Donalds and Republicans in general. But then he goes on to say, notice how he tries to price in a shift of the goalpost here. He's like, and by the way, I believe it. Or I don't believe that Joe Biden didn't receive bribes, but even if he didn't, if Hunter Biden did nefarious things, then that somehow indicts Joe Biden. It's this weird law of like a transitive property of morality or something, that if a Democrat's relative does something untoward or sinister, and again, this only applies to Democrats, if they do something sinister or untoward, then the political relative is somehow morally culpable for their actions. It's very bizarre. And by the way, it does not apply to Republicans. It's a transitive law of morality which only applies to Democrats, apparently. But there's also a great op-ed in the Washington Post written by a gentleman named Philip Bump, who basically called, and he does this very thoroughly, he calls James Comer and the Republican Party writ large out. So where's the bribe, James Comer? And we won't read the whole thing, but he says, it's now been more than 3 months since House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer and Senator Chuck Grassley issued a release in which they accused President Biden of having been allegedly engaged in a bribery scheme with a foreign national. And of course, they're referring to that FD 1023 form, an FBI interview of an informant who spoke with Mykola Zlochevsky, founder of the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. If validated, it would mark not only a significant legal violation on the part of President Biden, but it was the first time that Comer's breathless efforts to tie Biden to foreign payments was actually demonstrated. It was not validated. Comer and Grassley, who were already familiar with an FBI form detailing the contents of the interview, spent a few weeks demanding that the FBI release the interview to the public. The FBI, concerned both about putting the informant at risk and about making public unsubstantiated claims, decided to offer a redacted version of the memo for legislators to see. Comer and Grassley then started complaining about the redactions and demanded more people be able to see the interview. Eventually, Grassley just went ahead and released a lightly redacted version on social media. The idea that Biden and his son Hunter Biden had been bribed took hold of an article took hold as an article of faith on the right. Fox News has mentioned bribe or bribery in the context of Biden more than 1,100 times since the allegation was first made. And again, this is a 3-month period, 1,100 times in 3 months, despite the lack of evidence beyond an FBI document, and despite the erosion of credibility of the allegation in at least 2 ways. So we have Mykola Zlochevsky, the Burisma executive. He said 2 years later in another FBI document, 2 years after that initial document with the allegations, in an interview with the FBI, he says, listen, I've never had any financial relationship with Joe Biden. So he says, according to an FBI source, Zlochevsky says one thing at one time. And then 2 years later, we have the document of Zlochevsky refuting what was allegedly said by Zlochevsky in the first document. So the most recent evidence we have of this same person is saying, no, I never have any sort of financial relationship with Joe Biden. And then, of course, there was the recent Devon Archer testimony, and this was hyped again and again as the smoking gun. Devon Archer would provide the smoking gun against President Biden. And of course, as we've discussed, he didn't. As a matter of fact, when this form and these allegations were discussed, because Devon Archer was asked about them, he was like, I don't believe it. I knew Mykola Zlochevsky, and he did. Devon Archer, Hunter Biden, and Mykola Zlochevsky had a relationship because they were all on the Burisma board. So he knows everybody involved in this. Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Mykola Zlochevsky. He's like, not only do I not have any evidence that this bribe ever took place, I would be shocked if it did. And I don't consider this evidence that it did. And this was the Republican star witness. So the whole thing has just imploded every which way, but it hasn't stopped Republicans from just casting aspersions anyway and trying to make it the basis for an impeachment inquiry. But that's why Byron Donalds is doing what he's doing. I'm not a fortune teller, but it seems to me that the only reason that the Republican Party would want to move the goalpost here and say, listen, I don't believe it. I do believe that there's evidence. But even if we don't have evidence, it's still really bad that Joe Biden is still impugned and morally indicted if his son did something corrupt and nepotistic, even if we have no evidence that Joe Biden benefited from it or encouraged it or had any knowledge of it. The Republican Party is profoundly pathetic, intellectually dishonest. Do not let them trick you into moving the goalpost and grading them on a curve as they always want you to do. Don't fall for it.